Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at something you specifically requested, negative pressure wound therapy, or NPWT for short. We're going to break it down, how it works, and all that, and we've got just the resource to help us do it.
Absolutely. We're diving deep into a document from the European Wound Management Association.
Oh, wow.
They are like the authority on wound care.
Okay, yeah.
It's published in the Journal of Wound Care, so we know it's legit and packed with insights from leading wound care experts.
That's awesome, and full transparency here. The document mentions support from several companies involved in wound care, which, honestly, is a good sign.
Totally agree.
They're pooling their knowledge to make sure the information is, well, balanced and scientifically sound.
Yeah, it's all about getting that well-rounded perspective.
Exactly. So, are you ready to unlock the secrets of NPWT with me? We'll uncover its history, which I think is really fascinating, explore the many types of wounds it can treat, and peek into the future of this, honestly, kind of game-changing therapy.
Sounds good. Let's dive in.
Okay, first things first, can you give us a simple breakdown of what NPWT even is?
So picture this. You have a wound, right? And it's covered with a special sponge-like material. Now imagine a gentle vacuum pulling that sponge inwards. That's the basic idea behind NPWT. It applies controlled negative pressure to the wound, and that does a few key things. Removes excess fluid, reduces swelling, and it creates the right environment for healing to happen faster.
So it's like a super high-tech vacuum cleaner for wounds.
Yeah, you could think of it that way, but it's much more sophisticated than a vacuum cleaner. One of the fascinating things about NPWT is that it actually stimulates blood flow to the wound. And I was reading how that increased blood flow brings in vital oxygen and nutrients. It's like fuel for the healing process.
Wow, so stretching those tissues actually tells the body to heal faster. That's wild.
It really is. And this therapy has been around longer than you might think. Did you know it dates back to the late 1970s? In Russia?
No way, really. Tell me more.
Well, back then, the systems were a bit more basic. They combined suction with irrigation. So basically, they were washing the wound while applying suction. But things have advanced a lot since then. Today's units are programmable, offering all sorts of settings and options. It's really come a long way.
That's a huge leap from basic suction and irrigation to these super advanced programmable units. And speaking of advancements, the document mentioned a couple of variations on the basic NPWT, right?
Right. There's NPWTI, where they introduce antiseptic or antibiotic solutions into the wound, along with the negative pressure.
So it's like a targeted cleaning system.
Precisely. Delivering those solutions directly to where they're needed.
Okay, I see. And that's awesome. What about the other modification?
That one is called CNPT, and it's specifically for closed surgical wounds. So instead of an open wound, it's used on incisions after they've been stitched up. They apply the negative pressure right on the incision.
So it's like extra protection and support for healing those newly closed wounds. It's really incredible how versatile this therapy is, with so many different approaches for all these different wounds.
It really is. And that versatility is why it's so useful in treating a whole range of conditions.
Right.
But before we jump into all of that, let's zoom in on the science behind it. I know we already talked about increased blood flow, but what else is happening at the cellular level? I remember the document mentioned something called granulation tissue.
Granulation tissue, yeah, that caught my eye too. What is that exactly, and how does NPWT affect it?
Okay, so think of granulation tissue as the base, the foundation for new tissue to grow, like the body's way of rebuilding that damaged area. It's full of tiny blood vessels and cells that produce collagen. You know, that's what makes up our skin and tissues. It's like the building block. And NPWT, it actually boosts the formation of this granulation tissue.
Okay, I'm following so far. Tell me more.
Well, it's that increased blood flow we talked about, right? It delivers all those necessary ingredients for new tissue. But also the gentle stretching from the negative pressure actually signals those cells to, like, wake up and multiply and produce more collagen.
So it's like NPWT sets the stage and then gives the body that extra push to really kickstart its own healing powers.
Exactly. It creates the perfect environment for tissue regeneration to happen. Pretty amazing, huh?
It really is. Now, I'm curious to see how all of this translates into real-world applications. I mean, this document lists so many specialties where NPWT is used, from trauma and abdominal surgery to, like, vascular surgery and even chronic wounds like diabetic foot ulcers. Where do you think we should even begin?
Well, I think trauma is a great place to start because NPWT really shines there. I mean, it's so valuable in treating those severe, complex wounds like you see with open fractures, burns, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I can see how crucial it would be in those high-pressure situations. What does it
Yes.
actually do?
It helps control bleeding, which is, well, obviously crucial when we're talking about trauma, and it helps prevent infection. It also really helps prepare the wound for further treatment, like skin grafts or reconstructive surgery.
So it's like a crucial first step in getting those wounds stabilized and ready for the next stage of healing.
Exactly. And another area where NPWT is widely used is in abdominal surgery.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's often used to manage open abdomens, especially after really complex procedures or, if there's a high risk of infection. It can protect the internal organs, reduce bacteria, and encourage that abdomen to close faster.
It sounds incredibly valuable for surgeons in those really complicated cases. And the document also mentioned cardiovascular surgery, right? Does NPWT have a role there too?
It does. A major application is treating sternal wound infections, which can be a serious problem after open heart surgery. NPWT helps clean the wound, reduces inflammation, and really promotes healing of that sternum.
Makes sense. And I also read that it's not just about treating existing infections, right? NPWT can be used prophylactically. I thought that was really fascinating.
You're absolutely right. It's sometimes applied to closed incisions, particularly in patients who are more prone to infections. That negative pressure basically acts like a seal, making it harder for bacteria to get into the wound.
An extra layer of defense, especially for those who might be more vulnerable. This is so versatile.
It is. And we've only just scratched the surface. The document goes on to highlight even more uses, for example, in vascular surgery, where it's used to manage infected blood vessels and vascular grafts. And that's a whole different level of complexity and risk, right?
That sounds terrifying.
Mm.
But even in those situations, it seems like NPWT can still make a huge difference.
Absolutely. By controlling infection, reducing inflammation, and promoting healing, it can literally be a lifesaver. And these are just a few examples. So many different medical specialties are using NPWT now. It's really versatile with a, constantly expanding range of uses. We'll definitely go into more detail later in the deep dive.
Can't wait. But before we do, I think it's really important to consider the patient's perspective. What's it actually like to live with NPWT? I mean, it's got to be pretty challenging, both physically and emotionally, don't you think?
You hit the nail on the head. While NBWT offers amazing benefits for wound healing, it does come with its own unique set of challenges. I think understanding what that patient experience is like is just as important as understanding the science behind it.
Well said. Let's dive into that aspect next. I'm interested to hear more about what patients go through during this therapy.
And it can definitely be a big change for people.
For sure. And the document really highlights some of those challenges, both the physical and the social aspects. So let's start with the physical side of things. What are some of the things that patients commonly have to deal with?
Well, mobility is a big one. Imagine being kind of tethered to this device, even if it's a portable one. Depending on where the wound is and how big it is, even simple things like moving around or getting comfortable can become a real challenge.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's easy to forget about those everyday things when we're focused on the bigger picture of healing. What else stood out to you from the document?
The noise. A lot of people don't realize how disruptive that can be. That constant humming sound, especially at night. Imagine trying to sleep with that.
Oh gosh, I can imagine that would drive me crazy. I'm a light sleeper. I don't think I'd get any rest. And of course, it's not just the physical discomfort, right? There's the emotional and social impact of NPWT too.
Absolutely. Living with a wound, especially a complex one, it can really impact your mental well-being. The document talks about the stress and anxiety that a lot of people experience. You're constantly aware of this device. You might worry about it leaking or malfunctioning. And then there's the uncertainty, not knowing how long it'll take to heal. That can be really tough to deal with.
I can see how that would weigh on anyone. And then there's that social piece, having a visible wound and being connected to a device. It can affect how people interact with you, unfortunately.
Sadly, that's true. The document talks about feelings of self-consciousness and even stigma. People might stare, they might ask really personal questions, or they might even avoid you altogether. That can lead to feelings of isolation, especially when you're already feeling vulnerable.
That's just heartbreaking. It really emphasizes how a physical wound can create these invisible but very real emotional and social wounds as well.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's why it's so important for healthcare professionals to be really sensitive to these concerns. Patient education is absolutely crucial. I mean, taking the time to explain how the device works, what to expect during the treatment, how to handle any potential side effects, that goes a long way in easing anxiety and giving patients a sense of control over their own healing process.
Empowering them, exactly.
Exactly. It's all about giving them the information and support they need to get through this. And it's not just about the patient, it's about their families and caregivers too, right? They're often the ones on the front lines, providing both practical and emotional support, so they need to be involved as well.
That's a really good point. This deep dive is really bringing to light that human side of wound care. It's not all about the technology. It's about the people
Yeah.
and how all of this impacts their lives.
Absolutely. And speaking of the bigger picture, the document also talks about the organizational aspects of NPWT. It's not just about having the device. It's about making sure you have the right infrastructure, the expertise to really use it effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. What are some of the key considerations when it comes to that?
Well, one thing the document addresses is the different settings where NPWT can be delivered. It's not just in hospitals anymore. It's being used more and more in primary care settings and even at home.
That's amazing. So it's much more accessible now.
Exactly. But that shift does present some challenges. You know, hospitals, they have these established systems for managing NPWT, but primary care clinics and home care agencies might need more support, more training to make sure it's being used safely and correctly.
It's definitely a different ballgame depending on the setting. What else is important from an organizational standpoint?
Inventory management is huge. Whether it's a hospital stocking devices or a home care agency coordinating supplies, having a reliable system in place is so important. The right equipment, the right dressings, all of those things need to be available when and where they're needed. It all comes down to logistics.
It's all in the planning. It's
Yeah.
definitely more complex than just handing someone a device and hoping for the best.
Definitely. And then there's the issue of responsibility, you know? Who's managing the treatment? Who's providing the training and support to patients and caregivers? Defining those roles clearly is crucial for things to run smoothly.
So many moving parts to keep track of. And the document also stressed the importance of good communication and documentation, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those are essential for patient safety, you know, to make sure everyone is on the same page. Clear documentation makes sure that information is shared accurately, and it helps prevent mistakes or miscommunications, especially when you have different healthcare providers involved.
It's like connecting all the dots, making sure everyone's working together, a real team effort.
Exactly. And that teamwork is even more critical when we talk about what's called off-label use.
Off-label use. I haven't heard that term before. What does that mean in this context?
Basically, it's using NPWT for something that's not specifically approved by the device manufacturer.
Yeah.
So, for example, using a device that's meant for wound care on a closed surgical incision.
So it's like being a little innovative, maybe pushing the boundaries of how the technology is typically used.
That's a good way to think about it. But it's not something to be taken lightly. It requires careful consideration and, of course, informed consent from the patient. The document makes it clear that it should only be done by really experienced clinicians who understand all the potential risks and benefits.
It's walking that tightrope between being innovative and being cautious.
You got it. And this actually brings us to another crucial aspect of NPWT that we haven't talked about yet.
Okay, what's that?
Cost effectiveness.
Ah, yes, the financial side of things. I know healthcare costs can be a bit of a minefield. But tell me, is NPWT considered an expensive therapy?
Well, the upfront costs can seem pretty high, I'll admit. The devices themselves can be pricey, plus the ongoing cost of dressings and other supplies. But the document argues that NPWT can actually save money in the long run.
Okay, interesting. How so?
Research has shown that it can actually speed up healing time. That means shorter hospital stays and fewer complications, right? And that translates to significant cost savings for the healthcare system overall.
So it's like an investment. It pays off over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as technology keeps advancing, we're probably going to see even more cost-effective solutions coming out.
Speaking of advancements, the document doesn't just focus on the here and now. It actually looks ahead at the future of MTWT too.
Yeah.
What are some of the developments on the horizon that have you excited?
Well, one thing that's getting a lot of attention is the development of sensor-integrated systems.
Sensor-integrated systems.
Yeah. Imagine devices that can actually monitor wound healing in real time.
Oh, wow. So we can actually see what's happening as it heals. That's amazing.
Exactly. These sensors could detect early signs of infection, track changes in temperature or fluid levels, even provide feedback on how well the therapy is working.
It's like taking all the guesswork out of the process.
Right. And another cool area of research is in wound filler materials. Scientists are looking at new materials with, better properties, like better absorption, antimicrobial action, and even some that are biodegradable.
Biodegradable. That sounds straight out of science fiction.
I know, right? But it's becoming a reality. Imagine a wound filler that just dissolves naturally as the wound heals. No more painful dressing changes.
That would be a game changer,
Yeah.
especially for people struggling with those chronic wounds.
Absolutely. And then there's the research being done on personalized NPWT, so tailoring treatment to each individual patient and their specific needs.
So moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and really focusing on precision wound care.
Exactly. It's about finding the absolute best treatment for each person. And as exciting as all these advancements are, the document stresses the importance of ongoing research and clinical trials, to make sure everything is both safe and effective. Innovation is great, but it has to be backed by solid science.
Couldn't agree more. That's so important. This has been an incredible journey so far. We've gone from the basics of what NPWT is to all these potential future applications, and I feel like I've learned so much.
I'm glad to hear that. But before we wrap up our deep dive, I think there's one key message that runs through the entire document that we need to emphasize.
What's that?
The importance of individualizing treatment. Every patient is different, every wound is different, and their treatment plan needs to reflect that. It's not just a matter of plugging in a device and calling it a day.
It's a much more holistic approach, looking at each patient as a unique individual, considering their medical history, their lifestyle, and their preferences as well.
Precisely. Open communication is key, collaboration between all the healthcare professionals involved, and a real understanding of how this technology interacts with the human body.
Yeah, it's really moving towards a more personalized and data-driven approach to wound care, isn't it?
It really is, and that's incredibly exciting. But even with all of these amazing advancements coming up, we can't forget about the human side of things.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, technology is a powerful tool, right? But it's only one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
The compassion, the empathy, the understanding that healthcare professionals bring to the table, that human connection, that's irreplaceable.
So it's finding that balance, that right mix of high tech and high touch.
Exactly. That's what makes this field so interesting to me, that constant interplay between these cutting-edge innovations and that genuine human connection.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to how complex NPWT is, and just wound care in general, really.
Yeah.
It's so much more than just, fixing a physical injury.
Absolutely. And I hope that our conversation has given you a better understanding of this therapy and how it can really impact people's lives.
It definitely has. We've covered a lot of ground. We talked about the history and the science behind NPWT, explored its uses in all these different medical fields. We even looked at the patient experience and the organizational side of things, and even got a sneak peek into the future of it all.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I'm glad we could share it with you.
As we wrap things up here, I want to leave you with something to think about. With all these advancements in technology and, our understanding of how wounds heal, what do you see for the future of NPWT? Do you think those personalized, sensor-driven systems will become the standard of care one day? Will we see even more creative uses for it? What do you think?
That's a great question. Honestly, I'm excited to see what happens. There's so much potential, so many possibilities in wound care right now, and NPWT is right at the forefront of it all. It's going to be exciting to watch it evolve.
I can't wait to see what the future holds. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of negative pressure wound therapy. We hope you found it helpful and informative.
And as always, keep learning, keep exploring, and if you have any specific questions or concerns about your own health journey, talk to your doctor. They're your best resource.
Until next time, stay curious, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.